Welcome back everyone, I'm Rachel and in this video I'm going to go over the structure of the cuneiform bones. The cuneiform bones are 3 bones located in each foot. If we look closer at the dorsal view of the right foot, which is the top of the foot, highlighted in red we can see the 3 cuneiform bones. If we now look at the plantar view at the right foot, which is the sole of the foot, the cuneiform bones are again highlighted in red. The medial cuneiform bone is located on the medial side of the foot. The intermediate cuneiform bone is the middle cuneiform bone. The lateral cuneiform bone is the most laterally located of the cuneiform bones. What about the landmarks of the 3 cuneiform bones? Let's start by looking at the medial cuneiform bone. Here we have the anteromedial and the posterolateral views of the right medial cuneiform. The medial cuneiform is the largest of the 3 cuneiform bones. This bone has 6 surfaces. The first of these surfaces is the medial surface. This surface is roughened for ligament attachment and has an area for attachment of the tendon of the tibialis anterior muscle. The second surface is the lateral surface. This surface has 2 facets for articulation with other bones. Proximally on this lateral surface is a facet for articulation with the intermediate cuneiform bone. Distally on this surface is a facet for articulation with the second metatarsal bone. The third surface is the plantar surface. This surface is roughened for ligament attachment. The fourth surface is the dorsal surface, which is again roughened. The fifth surface is the anterior surface, also known as the distal surface. This surface has a large facet for articulation with the first metatarsal bone. The sixth and final surface is the posterior surface, also known as the proximal surface. This surface is concave and has a facet on it for articulation with the navicular bone. Let's now look at the intermediate cuneiform bone. Here we have the anteromedial and the posterolateral views of the right intermediate cuneiform. The intermediate cuneiform is wedge-like in shape and the smallest of the cuneiform bones. This bone has 6 surfaces. The plantar and dorsal surfaces don't have any articular surfaces but do have roughened surfaces for ligament attachments. The medial surface has a facet on part of it for articulation with the medial cuneiform. The lateral surface has a facet on it for articulation with the lateral cuneiform bone. The anterior surface, also known as the distal surface, has a facet on it for articulation with the second metatarsal. The posterior surface, also known as the proximal surface, has a facet for articulation with the navicular bone. Now let's look at the landmarks of the lateral cuneiform bone. Here we have the posteromedial view and the anterolateral view of the right lateral cuneiform. This bone is wedge-like in shape and has 6 sides. The plantar and dorsal surfaces are roughened for ligament attachment. The medial surface has an indented strip along it where the intermediate cuneiform sits. It also has 2 small facets for articulation with the second metatarsal. Sometimes these facets instead form a narrow strip. The lateral surface has a facet proximally for articulation with the cuboid bone. It also has a facet on the distal portion of the surface for articulation with the fourth metatarsal bone. The anterior surface, also known as the distal surface, has a facet on it for articulation with the third metatarsal bone. The posterior surface, also known as the proximal surface, has a facet on it for articulation with the navicular bone. Let's now look at the articulations these bones have with other bones. Let's start with the medial cuneiform bone. This bone articulates with 4 other bones. The first of these articulations is with the first metatarsal bone. The large facet on the anterior surface of the medial cuneiform articulates with the distal surface of the first metatarsal. The second articulation is with the second metatarsal bone. A facet on the distal end of the lateral surface of the medial cuneiform articulates with a facet on the medial surface of the base of the second metatarsal. The third articulation is with the intermediate cuneiform bone. The proximal facet on the lateral surface of the medial cuneiform articulates with a facet on the medial surface of the intermediate cuneiform. The fourth and last articulation is with the navicular bone. A facet on the posterior surface of the medial cuneiform articulates with the medial facet on the distal surface of the navicular bone. Let's now move on to the intermediate cuneiform bone. This bone articulates with 4 other bones. The first of these articulations is with the second metatarsal bone. A facet on the anterior surface of this bone articulates with the base of the second metatarsal. The second of these articulations is with the medial cuneiform bone. A facet on the medial surface of this bone articulates with the facet on the lateral surface of the medial cuneiform. The third articulation is with the lateral cuneiform bone. A facet on the lateral surface of this bone articulates with the facet on the medial surface of the lateral cuneiform. The fourth and final articulation is with the navicular bone. A facet on the posterior surface of this bone articulates with the intermediate facet on the distal surface of the navicular bone. Now for the articulations of the lateral cuneiform bone. This bone articulates with 6 other bones. The first articulation is with the second metatarsal bone. 2 small facets on the medial surface of this bone articulates with facets on the lateral surface of the base of the second metatarsal bone. The second articulation is with the third metatarsal bone. A facet on the anterior surface of this bone articulates with the proximal surface of the third metatarsal bone. The third articulation is with the fourth metatarsal bone. A facet on the distal end of the lateral surface of this bone articulates with a facet on the medial surface of the base of the fourth metatarsal. The fourth articulation is with the intermediate cuneiform bone. A strip along the medial surface of this bone articulates with a facet on the lateral surface of the intermediate cuneiform. The fifth articulation is with the cuboid bone. A facet on the lateral surface of this bone articulates with a facet on the medial surface of the cuboid bone. The sixth and final articulation is with the navicular bone. A facet on the posterior surface of this bone articulates with the lateral facet on the distal surface of the navicular bone. What about the muscles that attach to these bones? The medial cuneiform bone has 3 muscles that attach to parts of the bone. A portion of the tendon of the tibialis posterior muscle attaches onto the plantar surface of this bone. A portion of the tendon of the fibularis longus muscle attaches onto the lateral side of the plantar surface of this bone. In addition, a portion of the tendon of the tibialis anterior muscle attaches onto the medial surface of this bone. The intermediate cuneiform bone only has 1 muscle attachment. A portion of the tibialis posterior muscle attaches onto the plantar surface of this bone. The lateral cuneiform bone also only has 1 muscle attachment. A portion of the tendon of the tibialis posterior muscle attaches onto the plantar surface of this bone. In some cases, a portion of the flexor hallucis brevis muscle originates from this bone. And that concludes this video on the structure of the cuneiform bones. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you for watching. If you want to support this channel, please subscribe and check out more of my videos.